Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm editor-in-chief of RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us today. Today we are joined by Anshu Agarwal, who's the VP of Marketing at ConteXtream, a company that plays in the SDN and NFV space. Anshu, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, maybe we'll start with, for those who perhaps don't know much about your company, maybe give a quick overview of the company and perhaps how you guys operate in the SDN and NFV space for those watching.
Oh, sure. So ConteXtream is a carrier SDN company. We are focused solely on carriers. We are not like other SDN companies who focus on mostly enterprise. Our focus has been on carriers. We started a long time ago. We started in 2007, pre-SDN, pre-NFV days, with the mission to virtualize carrier networks. And as you can imagine, when we proposed that idea to several carriers, some progressive carriers really liked the idea. So when the SDN NFV name was given, it kind of gave us a face. Okay, and since we started early, we've been deployed in major tier 1 carriers across the globe, and they've been running traffic in production using our systems. And we have specific solutions catering to different types of carriers, mobile, fixed, and cable. But our mobile carriers, that's our sweet spot. And one of our solutions that we offer to our mobile carriers is the virtualization of GI-LAN services. I can go through that now so you can understand what the GI-LAN services is. But it's primarily the services offered behind the interface of GI interface in a mobile carrier, which is like video optimization, TCP optimization, content filtering, parental control, firewall, NAT, all of these functions. And what carriers are doing, mobile carriers are doing today, is virtualizing those services. It enables them not just reducing the cost, but also offer new services more quickly.
Got it. Okay, that sounds good. Well, obviously, like you said, you guys have been in the space for quite some time, and I'm sure you have quite a bit of history with the way carriers operate. Obviously, carriers, especially when you guys first started, I'm sure were much more conservative when it came to thoughts of virtualization. Obviously, a lot of wireless operators are very hardware-centric and are much more comfortable with hardware as opposed to software. So, I guess, yeah, how was I guess the reception initially to your entrance into the space, and I guess how has that changed over the past couple of years? Have you seen a broader adoption or more understanding from carriers when it comes to the need to perhaps virtualize some other functions?
Oh, absolutely. We have seen a big change. Earlier, I mean, it was the CTO, progressive CTO, like people, they were convinced that this is the way to go, but the operations team may not be convinced easily. But with this SDN, NFV kind of a movement, it's made it a lot easier. The only thing I would say is adoption in different carriers is at different stages. So some are fully in production, some are in field trials, some are in lab trials, and some are just thinking about it. It depends on what stage a carrier is in their network. Okay. The other thing is what use case is in deployment. So especially in the NFV framework, that's a very important thing to note, that virtualization of GI-LAN we see happening today. Okay, virtualization of EPC, we see it's going into lab trials at best. Maybe next year more in lab trials. Field trials would be later. But there are other aspects of the network which have not been virtualized at all. So NFV over there will take time. It's a long road, and it's happening use case by use case.
Got it. Now, when you kind of mention, I guess, the different stages where carriers are, is it more of a technology stage, or is it, I guess, what's been kind of the limiting factor for carriers? I mean, is it just the progressiveness of perhaps the management team, or what's kind of I guess, the gating factor when it comes to carriers, being maybe more advanced or less advanced in the deployment of SDN and NFV?
So it's, I think it's an initiative within the carrier. Primarily, that's the thing that drives them. So a couple of our deployments were driven, that they wanted to add new services more quickly. They were not driven by optimization, although optimization is the primary reason why most carriers started adopting SDN. But in our case, it was because they wanted to add new services. Optimization was important. You can't break their bank by deploying a new solution, but you have to provide a forward-looking, you can say forward-looking value proposition, which is creating that programmable network so they can roll out new services, differentiate from competitors, differentiate from OTT players. So it's different for different carriers. Some carriers are just actually managing traffic on their network because the smartphone penetration is greatly increasing. So that's the thing they need to handle, optimize the network. So that's why they're on different stages.
Got it. Okay. And obviously that kind of that value proposition of it. I mean, obviously, carriers are always looking whenever they can to perhaps trim costs from operations. So that seems like an important part of this. Has that been a bit of a challenge to kind of, I guess, convince carriers or to show them that that there is a value proposition to this? I mean, it might not be an immediate return, but if you look at it maybe over a longer period of time, obviously it does make sense to kind of make this move towards more virtualization, SDN kind of space.
I would say with some of them, but majority of them, the large ones, are convinced. And thanks to organizations like Etsy and all, they have helped a long way because there is a demonstrated need also, and the carriers understand that they need to innovate fast enough to compete. Otherwise, basically, their revenue streams can be stolen by players like OTT players also. So it depends on what kind of carrier it is. Most of our customers are tier one, and tier one are convinced that this is the way to go.
Yeah, and obviously I know I've talked to a few carriers and other companies on this space, and it does seem like there is a bit of a kind of a trial kind of period where they try maybe perhaps small projects initially before
Absolutely.
rolling it out, because again, these are carriers are again somewhat of a conservative bunch, and so they don't want to virtualize everything right away or rely on software immediately, but obviously
Yes.
they try it out a little at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And use case wise, also they're doing one use case at a time. Then at small projects, so they may be just doing lab trial first, then limited field trial. So they're not going fully in production right out of the gate.
Yeah. Now, I guess how are you seeing? I mean, you kind of mentioned that there are efficiency gains from going to virtualization. There are agility gains from going to virtualization. I guess how do you guys see the greatest impact, or where do you see the greatest impact coming from when carriers do kind of adopt an SDN or NFV kind of space? When they come to you asking, hey, where are we going to see the greatest gains at? What's your view, or what's the company's view on where they'll see perhaps the greatest return?
So the greatest gains are on optimization is definitely the very clear gain. Okay, the other gain is that you're adding agility to the network in rolling out services, which is hard to measure.
Mm-hmm.
But one of our customers has measured it really well. They wanted to roll out a service in a particular region, and they wanted to see if that's going to work or if that's going to scale. And that service did not work as well, so they removed it. So typically in carrier life cycle, it's never easy to add a new service and remove the new service. But with in this case, it was service chaining and traffic steering. So you were steering a very limited amount of traffic to this particular function in the service chain. So only like few subscribers were being steered to, and if it didn't work, you can remove it. So that's the kind of agility that's needed in a service provider network. And SDN, because it creates the service abstraction layer, a programmable network, allows you to do that. And it's definitely harder to measure, mm-hmm. but you are reducing a 3 to 5 year rollout cycle to somewhere really maybe 2 months. And it could be even further reduced if the carriers were ready to take a leap.
Sure. Now, you kind of mentioned Etsy being involved in this, and obviously it seems like the more perhaps standardized or that seems to always be a question when it comes to perhaps new technologies. It's a standardization process. I know with carriers, they do tend to kind of like things that are perhaps a little more standardized because it does perhaps provide a little more security going forward. How important do you feel standardization is when it comes to SDN? I mean, I know there's been a lot of different organizations that have popped up, kind of behind the SDN front or the SDN technology. How important do you guys find standardization is in the space right now?
It is important, I believe, because no one company can produce all the functions SDN fabric. It kind of defeats the purpose of SDN. Okay, it needs to be multi-vendor. You should be able to take best of breed of functions from anybody. So there is some standardization needed in terms of how they interface with each other, how the switches are programmed to carry out creating, whether this is a chain or no matter what the SDN use case is. So definitely standardization helps. But until these standards are fully baked, I think there is room for innovation creating these interfaces. and maybe they will be standardized. And Etsy kind of helps doing all that. Like so, for instance, I mean, a lot of these things, like right now, service function chaining is part of Etsy, and there is a body that's talking about it, and then it will go into IETF to become standard at some point in time. So it takes time, but definitely it helps the vendors and the carriers to reach a common solution, so you can have best of breed vendors in your network.
Gotcha, gotcha. Does it seem like that the vendors in the community right now are they pretty open to kind of working together, or is it still somewhat siloed where you have some groups working together but perhaps not sharing with other groups? I mean, does it seem like it's still a very cooperative, collaborative environment, or is it still kind of not quite to that place yet where everybody's still trying to find their footing?
I I find it quite cooperative actually. So we are involved in Open Daylight, we are involved in Etsy, we are involved in IETF, and I see very good participation from all the vendors. Um, I mean, the startups definitely are faster to roll out, and because they don't have any installed products,
Yeah.
which are physical proprietary products, whereas the large companies, they are working towards virtualized solutions. They probably even have that, but I mean, they have a business that is based on proprietary systems. So I do feel that all the vendor community is very interested in standardizing and actually making it work, because whether they participate or not, carriers are going to go that route. So it's not a vendor decision on whether this will happen or not. So it's something that we have to adapt and adopt.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I guess maybe looking forward a bit, what challenges do you see right now with perhaps gaining the, I guess, more trust of carriers? I mean, are there challenges really ahead for the more adoption of SDN and NFV from wireless carriers, or is it just a matter of timing of life cycles for carriers to really adopt it? I mean, do you guys see, I guess, any sort of issues there that might impact future growth for the market?
So the challenges are just how fast the carriers can move from one phase to another. I mean, they are not going to go into production right away, so they are going to have several phases. That's one challenge. The second challenge, I would say, is especially in mobile network, where you have 2G, 2.5G, 3G, 4G. I mean, there is just a variety of equipment in there. How do you migrate all of it towards a standard infrastructure? So until that happens, you got to handle all of this. So that's another challenge. And the third challenge could be, there are incumbent vendors who have these systems in place for decades, and they have been supplying. They are the preferred supplier to different carriers, and how fast the adoption can allow these innovating vendors to come in. So I see those as the challenges, but I mean, I know it for now that this is going to happen. It's going to take some time, and as I said, some use cases are easier, some use cases are more complex. Like I would think virtualized EPC is a lot more complex use case because it has so many interfaces. So any carrier who wants to do a replacement of their EPC has to do a lot of testing and making sure everything works when they move to virtualized platform. But it's going to happen. It's a matter of time.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it does seem like that it's an interesting time for software and NFV and SDN to come to the market, because again, operators are focusing a lot on their all IP networks, LT networks, VoLTE networks, which really seem to really play into kind of what these virtualization does. But again, they still have a lot of millions and millions and tens of millions of customers on legacy networks, 2G, 3G that's still out there. So yeah, it seems like the support model right now is a bit, I'm sure, more of a challenge than perhaps it will be in a few years from now, when perhaps the 2G and 3G networks are start to get turned down, and there's more focus on the all IP, LT, the more modern, advanced networks. So it definitely seems like a really interesting time right now for software companies out there.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great. Well, I guess then maybe a final question then. I mean, looking at the market, perhaps 12 to 18 months from now, do you see any big changes? Do you just see more advancements in the market? What's kind of your I guess maybe short to midterm view of where the SDN and NFV market are going to be, how they'll be evolving in the wireless space?
So and it's my perspective because we go after certain use cases, so it may not apply to, in general, the entire mobile carrier space. But what we see is a wider adoption of the GI-LAN services. And the main reason I see is because GI-LAN has been a pain point since the smartphone usage increased so rapidly and the traffic increased like anything. And so the carriers had to put these proprietary boxes right away to handle a lot of stuff and add new services and compete in the market, reduce churn, all of that. So they see that immediate pain point and they want to do something about it. Okay, so that I see in a very short term wider adoption. Then I see the use cases like Evolve Packet Core virtualization, and that is a very complex solution, as I said. And virtualization will simplify, will make it more programmable, but the carriers need to really spend more time than they would have spent on GI-LAN, given the complexity of the situation. And then you move into backhaul and Cloud RAN and all of that. They are in the air interface and all of that. There's more complexity that gets added into there. And they have been typically, if I'm not mistaken, single vendor solution in most of the cases. In that case, it's a monolithic solution, and you have to work to replace that with a SDN fabric and SDN fabric-based solution. So that will take even more time. So those are the things I see in short term virtualization of GI-LAN, addition of VoLTE. VoLTE is a great example. So IMS addition, virtualization of IMS to offer VoLTE. Then later EPC in I would say near term to midterm, and then midterm to future I see all RAN and backhaul in a mobile network.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean there has been a lot of hype over the past it seems 6 to 12 months around this topic, but really when you look at it, I mean it's really not even like the tip of the iceberg. Really, I mean there's so much potential or so much opportunity in this market. It seems like that not that it's being overhyped, but it seems like the amount of hype now compared to actually what's being used. I mean it seems like 2 or 3 years from now. The opportunities there. I mean, the hype will just be. I'm not sure how much bigger it can get, but obviously, it's going to be interesting to kind of watch how the market evolves, especially around the evolution of these networks too. So it'll be an interesting concept to watch.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is actually in future, mobile to mobile may be a big driver for this. So Internet of Things is a very small amount of traffic today, but as that grows, the adoption, because that's all greenfield. So it's much easier to deploy a newer solution. So that could happen.
Yeah, obviously, the MTM space is going to be huge, and again, that's you see all the numbers from the likes of Ericsson or Cisco, whoever puts out the big numbers, but the amount of connected devices, even if it hits half of those numbers, it's still going to put a lot of strain on a network, and so obviously carriers have to try to find ways. I mean, you can't just keep throwing spectrum and towers at these things. You have to kind of find more efficient ways to handle this traffic. So that's going to be a big challenge going forward.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree there.
Yeah, well, great. Well, Anshu, we definitely appreciate the time and insight today, and hopefully we can keep in touch and touch base again on this topic. But thanks again for the time today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right.